Intro, a body that forgot how to feel. There are women who no longer tremble when someone touches them, not because they're strong, but because their bodies have learned how to shut down. Zariah used to be called the good wife, her husband a successful businessman. Respected in the black community, never hit her in public. He didn't need to. He had a far more dangerous weapon, touch, not used for love, but for control. Every night, he stepped into their bedroom like it was a battlefield, and Zariah learned not to scream, not to flinch. She lay still as if her body was a rented room she no longer had ownership over. When the marriage ended, people thought she'd finally be free, but no one tells you this. When a man destroys your body through sex, you don't get free just because you signed a divorce paper. 6 years after the divorce, Zariah was still beautiful. Her makeup was flawless, her words measured. But from the neck down, her body was a desert, dry, still, without need, without desire. Until the day he touched the scar. Not on purpose, not in lust, just a gentle brush as light as a breeze. And Zariah's body began to tremble, like an abandoned instrument finally being tuned again. Chapter 1. The touch that asked for nothing. Zariah had forgotten what it felt like to be touched, without wanting to pull away. Not because she didn't know how to love, she had loved foolishly, loved so hard she believed a man who hit her could change, if only she tried hard enough. The last time her ex-husband shoved her down the stairs, Zariah didn't scream, not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain felt familiar. The scar on her left shoulder was all he left behind, and for 6 years after the divorce, no one touched it, not even her. She covered it with powder, wore long sleeves, and lived as if her skin was a borrowed suit she no longer had permission to feel. She only went to therapy because her cousin forced her. She expected nothing, but the place didn't smell like a clinic. It was quiet, warm, and when the man stepped out to greet her, he didn't ask, "What happened to you?" He simply said, "If all you want to do today is breathe, that's enough." His name was Calvin Monroe, 47, widower, once a firefighter, now a bodywork therapist who didn't teach people how to love, just helped them learn how to listen to their skin. Zariah lay on her side, fully clothed, on a soft floor mat. The lights were still on. She didn't close her eyes. She just stared at the ceiling like all the times she'd laid next to a man, but couldn't bring herself to say, "I don't want this." Calvin sat behind her, didn't touch anywhere else. He placed one hand on her left shoulder, right over the scar. She trembled immediately, not from pain, not from fear, but because her body suddenly heard itself again after years of forced silence. Calvin didn't rub, didn't press, didn't pull her closer. He just left his palm open, warm, still like it was saying, "I'm here, but you get to choose." 7 minutes passed. No words. Zariah began to cry. No sobs, no wailing, just water leaking from her eyes like old blood from a wound that had stayed too quiet for too long. She whispered, voice trembling. "Why does just one touch hurt this much?" Calvin's voice came soft as wind. "Maybe because this is the first time someone's touched you without wanting to take something from you." Soraya didn't answer. She just lay there, letting the shaking run through her like a quiet earthquake breaking down the prison she'd named. "I'm fine." That night, after her shower, she stood in front of the mirror. The bathroom light glowed a dull gold. She lifted her shirt, looked at the scar, and for the first time, she touched it. Skin to skin, it was cold, but not disgusting, not numb, not dead. Just strange. So I can still feel, she thought, I'm not dead. And for the first time in 6 years, she didn't turn off the light before going to bed. Chapter 2. A body that remembered for her. Some memories don't live in the mind. They settle in the back of your neck, in the curve of your hip, the crease of your hand, or the edge of your chest where a woman once learned to go numb just to survive being touched without consent. Soraya was one of those women. After her first session, she went home, turned off the lights, took a hot shower, didn't cry, didn't think too hard. She assumed it was just exhaustion, a reaction from poking old wounds. But the next morning, she was pouring coffee when her right hand jerked slightly. The cup nearly slipped. She caught it, froze. It wasn't a tremor, wasn't illness. It was a forgotten reflex, a piece of her body that had just awakened, as if it was saying, I'm still here, I still remember that touch, but this time, it didn't hurt. Soraya sat at the kitchen table. Her hand rested on her thigh. Her eyes stared into space. Something inside her was moving, unseen, unspoken, but real. That cold, protective shell she'd lived inside for years had just cracked a little. That night, in the bathroom, she stood before the mirror, same dim yellow light. But her gaze was different. She rolled up the left sleeve, looked at the scar, and for the first time she reached out and touched it. She thought it would sting, but it didn't. She just couldn't breathe for a few seconds, not out of fear, but because her body was recalling a language it hadn't spoken in years. The second session came the next week. Calvin didn't ask, "So how was your week?" He didn't use the voice of a therapist. He just looked at her, quiet, open, non-invasive. "If all you need today is to breathe," he said, "that's enough." Soraya didn't speak. She nodded, and this time, she laid down on her own. No long sleeves. Calvin moved slowly. He sat behind her, leaving just enough distance so she wouldn't feel cornered. Then he placed both hands gently on her shoulders, not firm, not controlling, not instructional, just present. At that moment, her chest tightened, her stomach flipped, her toes curled inside her shoes. Her body reacted like it had just been violated. But it hadn't. This touch had asked for permission. Still, her muscles didn't know that. She fell into a kind of body-mind split. Her mind knew she was safe, but her body was waking up old ghosts. She whispered, voice broken, "I don't know if I should cry or scream." Calvin didn't move. "You don't have to choose," he said. "Just let your body speak first." And she cried, this time not quietly. She cried like a child, mouth small, body curled, face buried in her arms, not from pain, but from rage. Rage at herself, rage at the scar, rage at every time she laid still just to avoid getting hit harder. The session ended. Calvin didn't say, "You did great." He didn't praise, didn't pat her shoulder. He simply looked at her and said, "Today, you didn't have to overcome anything. You just had to show up." Soraya walked out feeling heavy, like her legs had just trudged through mud. But inside her there was a light, small, like a distant car in the fog, but real. That night, she did something she hadn't done in 6 years. She touched herself. Not to feel sexy, not to reclaim desire, but just to check if she was still in there. Sitting in her dimly lit bedroom, she placed her hand on her thigh, softly, then her stomach, then her neck, and finally her left shoulder, the scar. She trembled, but didn't pull away. She breathed hard, but didn't let go. And in that moment, Soraya knew, my body isn't broken. It's just been waiting for me to come back, not with love, but with a touch that asks for nothing. Chapter 3. Her first safe night. There are nights when a woman doesn't need to be loved. She just needs to lie down without rehearsing how to say no. Without wondering, if I refuse, what will he do? No pretending to have a headache, no faking sleep, no quietly bracing her body as her skin whispers, "Run." Soraya had lived a lifetime like that. A body that flinched under kisses, that shut down as clothes came off, that pressed lips tight just to swallow what should have been soft, gentle, ecstatic, but never once felt safe in its own bed. That night, after her third session, it rained, not hard, just enough to make the air damp and cool. Soraya sat on her bed, wearing a silk nightgown she had bought long ago but never dared to wear. Not for anyone, not to seduce, just because, for once, her body felt worthy of being seen in something beautiful. The lights were off. No TV, no guided sleep meditation from YouTube. Just her, the dark, and her breath. She lay on her side, the blanket not pulled high this time. Her left hand rested on her belly, her right arm draped gently over her chest. Her heart didn't race, but it beat clearly. Her skin didn't tingle, but something stirred. Not desire, not sorrow, just a quiet watchfulness, as if her body was waiting to see if this night, too, would betray her. And then she touched herself. For the first time, not to check, not to masturbate, not to prove she still worked, just to be present with herself, with the skin that had been armor, with the chest that had once been forced to breathe to someone else's rhythm. Her hand traced the scar on her shoulder. No clenched jaw, No turning away, just closed eyes as her fingers began redrawing a body that violence had tried to erase. And suddenly, she shivered. Not from someone else's hand, but from her own bringing her back to life. Zoraya began to cry. No sobbing, just tears falling slowly down her temple, into the pillow, soaking into the fabric like a long overdue apology to the body she'd abandoned. "I'm sorry," she whispered through broken breath. "I'm sorry I let you be touched and didn't protect you. I'm sorry I was there, but didn't stand with you." And in the light rain outside, Zoraya, a woman once considered broken, was returning, cell by cell, breath by breath. She didn't need anyone to call her beautiful. She didn't need lips on her scar. She just needed her own fingers to touch it and not pull away. The next morning, Zoraya woke early, not from anxiety, but because her body was ready to step into daylight. She drank her coffee black, no makeup, wore a white blouse that didn't hide her shoulder. And when the building security guard accidentally saw the scar, Zoraya didn't cover it. She didn't explain. She just nodded politely and kept walking like a woman no longer living in fear. Because last night, she slept without building a fortress around her body. And this morning, for the first time in 6 years, she didn't feel like the walking dead. Chapter 4. The night she asked to be held. Some things are hard to ask for, not money, not love, but a hug. A hug without desire, without plans, without the smell of liquor, hands sliding down her back, or lips pressing against her ear. Just a hug held long enough for the body to understand it. No longer has to carry everything alone. Zoraya sat by her bedroom window, watching the world outside. 5 nights in a row, she hadn't slept. Not from nightmares, but because something in her body was awakening, and it was lonely. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't thirsty. She just needed something she'd never felt entitled to ask for. At 10:14 p.m., she called Calvin. "I'm okay," she said immediately. "I just don't know why I can't seem to take a deep breath tonight." Calvin didn't press. He simply said, "I'm nearby. If you need, I can come." Zoraya didn't say yes. She just exhaled soft and shallow like someone who had finally been heard without ever having to speak. 15 minutes later, Calvin arrived. No questions, no staring, no immediate hug. He just sat across from her in that small kitchen and waited, and that stillness was what made her break. "Can you hold me?" she asked. Not for any reason, not because I'm sweet, not because I'm strong, not because I'm worthy of love, just because I don't want another night to pass where my body thinks it only deserves to be touched when it's lying down. Calvin didn't say yes. He just stood, reached out, and opened his arms. Zoraya stepped in like someone finally escaping an iron cage. She laid her head against his chest, and they stood still. No music, no whispers, just 2 human beings and a small tremor passing through her chest. Not to destroy, but to soothe. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just breathed. For the first time in years, Zariah took a deep breath in the arms of a man without bracing herself for something worse to follow. 10 minutes later, she let go, her eyes still low, but her voice stronger than ever. "Thank you, not for holding me, but for not taking anything else after." Calvin gently touched her shoulder once. "You proved something tonight," he said, "that you're not someone who needs to be saved. You're someone who simply deserves to be touched without condition." Zariah doesn't remember what time she fell asleep. She only remembers waking up, and the bed wasn't soaked in sweat. Her nightgown hadn't shifted, and for the first time in years, her heart was still exactly where it belonged. It hadn't run, hadn't shattered, hadn't been taken away after the night was over. Because some hugs are safe enough to be called kinship, and deep enough for the body to finally believe it isn't dead. Chapter 5. She couldn't stop trembling. Trembling isn't always about fear. Sometimes it's what happens when the body finally releases what it's been holding on to for far too long. Like an old house groaning not in pain, but in relief as someone finally breaks the chains on its doors. Zariah didn't plan for that moment. She didn't schedule a breakdown, didn't prepare for an emotional quake. It came on an ordinary afternoon, right after her 5th therapy session. She was driving home when suddenly her throat tightened, not from emotion, but as if her whole body was about to seize. She pulled over, rested her head against the steering wheel, her back curled, hands gripping her thighs. And then she started trembling. First her fingers, then her shoulders, then all of her. No scream, no tears, no one touched her, just her nervous system suddenly remembering everything. She remembered the snap of a worn belt hitting skin, the feeling of being pinned to a bed after saying no, the low growl in her ear from a man who once said, "I love you," before wrapping his hands around her throat. All of it came flooding in, but this time, Zariah didn't curl up. She didn't run, she didn't block it out, she didn't scream. She just trembled and let herself tremble until her whole body felt like it had cracked open and something inside floated free. 15 minutes passed. Zariah opened her eyes. She was still alive, not passed out, not out of control, just emptied of something that had been living inside her bones like a parasite. She drove home. No music, no checking her phone. When she got there, she didn't go to the bedroom. She walked straight into the bathroom, took off her top, and stood in front of the mirror. And for the first time, she looked directly at the scar on her shoulder and felt nothing. No shame, no disgust, no sorrow. Just a mark, a witness, not a captor. That night, Calvin called. One simple question. "Do you need anything?" Zariah answered, "No, I just let my body say everything it needed to. Now I just want to sleep. No dreams, no moaning, and if possible, no flinching when my back touches the sheets." She turned off the light, didn't pull the blanket high, and like a song that didn't need a soundtrack, she let her breath pass through her lips natural, unforced. And in that moment, her chest began to tremble, not because someone touched her, but because she had finally stepped into herself fully for the first time. Some people don't need love right away. They just need a moment where they're allowed to tremble without being ashamed. Chapter 6. The woman who returned to herself. Some journeys don't need a destination. They just need a place to sit down and breathe without asking for permission. Zariah didn't become a motivational speaker. She didn't write a memoir. She didn't start a podcast about self-love. She just kept living with slower steps, longer sleep, and a body that was no longer a battlefield. 6 months after her final therapy session, she moved to a new place, not far, just a smaller apartment, fewer windows, but quiet enough to hear her own breath in the early morning. She bought a tall mirror and placed it upright in the living room, not for selfies, not for makeup, just to walk by now and then, catch her reflection, and nod not because she looked beautiful, but because she was present. One evening, Calvin texted her, "How are you?" Zariah replied, "I don't know what to call this. But this morning, while making coffee, I looked at my hands and didn't flinch, didn't freeze at footsteps outside my door, didn't grip my towel tight when a man walked into the cafe. I think I'm back." And she truly was. Not with someone, not back in a relationship, not back to her old self, but back to the part of her that had been abandoned when her first scream was choked inside her throat. Now, Zariah takes warm baths each night, lights candles not because anyone is coming over. She lies on her side, against a soft pillow, and touches herself like a greeting, not a survival instinct. She still has her scar. It never faded, but now she looks at it like a crack in a wall, once a fracture, now a place where light slips in. I no longer need anyone to tell me I'm worthy of love. She thinks I just need to touch myself each day and not feel like I'm betraying who I am. That's how she came back, not loudly, not with declarations, just fully present in her own skin. The ending wasn't when someone else held her. It was when she could hold herself and not tremble. That wasn't an ending. It was, for the first time, a beginning. For those still listening, some stories don't need a grand ending. Sometimes, all they need is someone brave enough to stand in front of the mirror and not look away. If you're still here, still listening, maybe you've once trembled from a wrong kind of touch, or maybe you went still from a right one. That came too late. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, know this: you are not alone. Thank you for listening to this story with your heart, or maybe with a body that once had to brace itself to survive. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a scar, a quiet moment, leave a comment below, because someone out there might need to read the pain you had the courage to name, just to believe they can survive too. And if you want to keep walking with us through stories that don't need to scream to be felt, through stories that don't need sex to remind your body that it's still yours, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone you believe. needs to hear it. This is Tales of Black. We don't tell stories just to entertain. We tell them so someone out there remembers. They are still worth living for.